From now on, Mom, the bank will be transferring your retirement funds directly to my account. You don't need anything, just a corner to yourself. I didn't respond, as my son and his fiancée sat across from me in the living room of the home I had purchased after decades as Vice President of Global Operations at Westlake Pharmaceuticals. The colonial mansion in Greenwich that had once felt like a victory lap, a testament to glass ceilings shattered, now felt like a gilded cage being locked from the outside. Michael slid the documents across my mahogany coffee table with the practiced confidence of someone who believed the conversation was already over. His fingers, sporting a new Patek Philippe watch I certainly hadn't gifted him, tapped impatiently as he waited for some acknowledgement. Before I finish telling my story, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what time you are listening to me. Beside him, Vanessa adjusted her posture, the Louboutin heels she never seemed to remove, even indoors clicking against my Italian marble floors. Her smile remained fixed, compassionate for anyone watching, predatory to my trained eye. I had negotiated with enough sharks in the pharmaceutical industry to recognize teeth behind a smile. "It's for your own protection," she added softly, reaching over to touch my hand with practiced sympathy. "We've noticed the little things, Helen, the forgotten appointments, the misplaced items." I glanced down at the documents, recognizing immediately what they were: power of attorney forms, banking transfer authorizations, and even a preliminary petition for limited guardianship, all apparently bearing my signature, though I had never seen these papers before today. "I understand this is difficult," Michael continued when I remained silent, "but we need to be proactive. Dr. Melton agrees that your cognitive decline—" "Dr. Melton?" I finally spoke, keeping my voice measured. 4 decades of corporate boardroom battles had taught me never to reveal your full hand at once. "Your therapist," Michael explained, with exaggerated patience. "You've seen her 3 times last month, Mom. The fact that you don't remember is exactly why we're doing this." I had never heard of Dr. Melton, had never visited any therapist. The realization of what was happening crystallized with cold clarity. My son and his fiancée were systematically orchestrating a hostile takeover of my life, my finances, and my independence. At 72, I was being quietly erased. "I see," I said simply, gathering the documents and standing up. "I'll need some time to process this." Relief flooded Michael's features, the same expression he'd worn as a child when getting away with something. "Take all the time you need, Mom. We're here to support you." I nodded and walked slowly to my study, closing the door behind me with a soft click. Once alone, I examined the signatures on the documents. The forgery was good, professional even, but detectable to me. The slight hesitation in the loop of my H, the excessive pressure on the downstroke of the R. Someone had copied my signature from existing documents rather than watching me sign naturally. I heard Michael and Vanessa moving around downstairs, their voices carrying faint notes of triumph poorly disguised as concern. My son's voice floated up. "We should update the estate attorney next week. The house should be transferred before the wedding." "Absolutely," Vanessa replied. "And we should discuss renovations. This place is so dated." They were already dividing my assets while I still lived and breathed. The home I had earned through years of boardroom battles and midnight strategy sessions, being discussed like a foreclosure property they'd acquired at auction. I moved to the window overlooking the gardens Charles and I had designed together, remembering how he'd always said I was at my most dangerous when underestimated. The quiet ones in the corner of the boardroom, he'd remind me, are usually the ones calculating your demise to the penny. Charles would have seen through Michael's scheme immediately. My late husband had worried about our son's moral compass for years, his tendency to seek the easiest path, his comfort with small deceptions. I had defended Michael, made excuses, covered financial shortfalls. Perhaps this was the inevitable result of maternal blindness. I opened my laptop and checked my accounts. Already, access to several had been restricted. Moving to my safe, I retrieved an unmarked phone, my break glass in case of emergency line from my corporate days. Only 3 people had this number, and all would answer regardless of the hour. "Margaret, it's Helen. I need your expertise and absolute discretion." Margaret Chen, my former CFO and closest friend, answered with the immediate alertness I remembered from countless corporate crises. "What's happened?" she asked, skipping pleasantries. "Michael is attempting to gain control of my finances through fraudulent documents. I need to understand exactly what's happening and how to stop it. I'll call James, she replied without hesitation, referring to our former legal counsel. Don't sign anything else. Don't confront them yet. And check your credit reports immediately. After ending the call, I did exactly that. Multiple new accounts had been opened in my name. Credit cards I'd never applied for. A mortgage refinance application pending. They'd been busy. I heard the front door close as Michael and Vanessa left for what they'd mentioned was a charity gala. The house fell silent. My house, that they planned to renovate and claim as their own, while relegating me to some corner. Moving with newfound purpose, I went to the kitchen. The sleek, professional-grade space had always been my second command center after my office. I opened the stainless steel refrigerator and stared thoughtfully at the empty shelves, an idea forming. It would take precision timing, evidence gathering, strategic alliances, exactly the skills that had propelled me through the corporate world. Michael had never really understood what I did at Westlake, had never shown interest in how I'd navigated the cutthroat pharmaceutical industry while maintaining my principles. He saw only the results, the house, the investments, the comfortable retirement. He'd never bothered to learn how I'd fought when cornered. I reached for an ice tray and emptied it into a large bowl. Then another, and another. Water began to freeze around my plan, a plan as cold and clear as the ice itself. Michael believed he was executing a perfect acquisition of assets from a declining target. But he had forgotten the most important lesson I'd taught in my corporate seminars. Always research your acquisition target thoroughly. Know their history, their tactics, their hidden resources. By morning, I would begin dismantling his scheme piece by piece. By the time he returned from his charity gala tonight and opened the refrigerator for his customary midnight snack, he would receive the first indication that his hostile takeover would not proceed unchallenged. After all, I hadn't spent 40 years breaking glass ceilings to be imprisoned beneath one in my own home. While Michael and Vanessa attended their charity gala, undoubtedly on my dime, I executed the first phase of my counteroffensive with the precision that had once earned me the nickname the Velvet Hammer at Westlake. Margaret arrived within an hour of my call, her Mercedes parked discreetly down the street rather than in my circular driveway. At 70, my former CFO retained the razor-sharp financial acumen that had helped build our company into a global powerhouse. She brought with her a slim laptop and a determined expression I recognized from countless corporate crises. "I've pulled your credit reports," she informed me, setting up at my kitchen island. "They've been busy. 4 new credit cards, a mortgage refinance application, and a line of credit, all within the past month." I examined the documents she displayed. "Those aren't my signatures." "Of course not," Margaret replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "But they're good forgeries, professional work. Can you trace who filed them?" "Already have," she said with grim satisfaction. The applications were submitted online from an IP address registered to a Callaway Consulting. "Your future daughter-in-law's company, I presume?" I nodded, memories of corporate espionage investigations surfacing. "What about this doctor?" "Melton, they claim I've been seeing?" Margaret's expression darkened. "She exists. Small practice in Stamford. Specializes in geriatric cognitive disorders. I'm having James look into whether she's actually filed any reports about you or if they're just using her name." While Margaret continued her digital forensics, I moved to the freezer section of my refrigerator, removing existing items to make space. I filled 3 large mixing bowls with water and placed them on the counter. "What are you doing?" Margaret asked, glancing up from her computer. "Creating a message," I replied, carefully placing copies of the fraudulent documents into a gallon-sized plastic bag. Michael has a habit of raiding the refrigerator after late nights out. Always has, since college. Understanding dawned in Margaret's eyes. Theatrical but effective. I approve. We worked in companionable silence for the next hour. Margaret tracing financial maneuvers, me preparing my frozen statement. By 11 p.m., my trap was set. The 3 bowls of water, each with layers of documents suspended within like prehistoric insects in amber, were freezing solid in my industrial-sized refrigerator. "The immediate concern is your access to funds," Margaret said, closing her laptop. "They've already redirected your monthly pension and dividend payments to the new account. You need operating capital." "I've prepared for contingencies," I assured her, moving to my study. From behind a false panel in my bookshelf, Installed at Charles's insistence years ago, I retrieved a lockbox containing $10,000 in cash, an additional checkbook for an account Michael knew nothing about, and a second set of identification documents. The hurricane fund, I explained, seeing Margaret's raised eyebrow. Charles always insisted we keep emergency reserves accessible and untraceable. Corporate paranoia that's finally proving useful. Smart, man, Margaret nodded approvingly. But this is just the beginning. We need to neutralize the fraudulent documents, secure your primary accounts, and establish a record of your cognitive competence. One step ahead of you, I replied, retrieving my phone to check the time. James is bringing a notary public and a geriatric neuropsychologist here tomorrow morning at 9. Michael and Vanessa never rise before 10 on weekends. Margaret smiled, the same smile I'd seen when she discovered accounting irregularities in our European division years ago. You always were best when cornered, Helen. I'm not cornered yet, I corrected her. Just underestimated. After Margaret departed, I settled into my routine as if nothing had changed. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea, checked the freezer where my ice blocks were solidifying beautifully, and retired to my bedroom. I didn't sleep. Instead, I reviewed decades of financial records, identifying vulnerabilities in my estate planning that Michael might exploit. I created a detailed timeline of when documents had been forged and accounts accessed. I compiled a list of witnesses who could attest to my mental acuity, fellow board members, the startup founders I still mentored, even my gardener who followed my specific and detailed instructions weekly. By dawn, I had a comprehensive dossier and a multi-phase strategy that would have impressed my former executive team. Phase 1 would begin the moment Michael opened the refrigerator upon returning home. Phase 2 would launch tomorrow morning with James and his specialists. Phase 3 would depend on Michael and Vanessa's reaction. At 1:47 a.m., I heard the front door open, followed by the murmur of voices. Michael and Vanessa returning, slightly intoxicated judging by the volume of their whispers and the unsteady footsteps. I remained in my darkened room, listening as they moved through my house as if it were already theirs. I heard the familiar sound of the refrigerator door opening, followed by an immediate, startled shout. "What the hell?" Vanessa's voice, slurred but alarmed. "What is it? What's wrong?" "The fridge. Look at this." A moment of silence, then Vanessa's gasp. "Are those our documents? In ice?" I could picture the scene perfectly. My son and his fiancée staring at the massive blocks of ice containing the evidence of their scheme, perfectly preserved and prominently displayed. Beside the frozen documents lay a single handwritten note I had carefully positioned. "Cold assets, frozen accounts. We should talk. Mom." Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs toward my bedroom. I quickly slipped under the covers and closed my eyes, regulating my breathing to mimic sleep. My door flew open without a knock. "Mom!" Michael's voice, sharp with alarm and anger. "Mom, wake up!" I stirred slowly, deliberately, like a woman roused from deep sleep. "Michael, what time is it? What did you do to the documents in the refrigerator?" he demanded, flipping on my bedroom light. His face was flushed, his expensive tuxedo rumpled. I blinked at the sudden brightness, maintaining the appearance of confusion. "Documents? In the refrigerator? I don't understand, dear." Vanessa appeared behind him, her gala makeup smudged, her expression less certain than it had been earlier. "Helen, those papers we discussed, they're frozen in ice blocks in your refrigerator." "How strange," I murmured, sounding genuinely perplexed. "I was just organizing the freezer earlier. Perhaps I got confused. You know, the cognitive decline you both mentioned." Michael's jaw tightened at my deliberate echo of their earlier concerns. "This isn't funny, Mom. Those are important legal documents." "Are they?" I asked innocently, sitting up. I must have mistaken them for something else, in my confused state. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Michael's face. He had expected either denial or confrontation, not this strategic ambiguity that left him without a clear response. "We'll discuss this in the morning," he finally said, backing toward the door. "When you're more yourself." "Certainly, dear," I replied with a gentle smile. "I always enjoy our talks." As they retreated, closing my door with exaggerated care, I allowed myself a small smile. Phase 1 complete. The ice had been broken, literally and figuratively. The real battle would begin at 9 a.m. when James arrived with the specialists who would document my perfectly intact cognitive abilities and begin the process of reclaiming my financial independence. Michael had inadvertently taught me an important lesson. Even family could attempt a hostile takeover, but he had forgotten who had taught him everything he knew about strategy and who had kept the best lessons for herself. I rose at 5:30 a.m., a habit from decades of early morning board meetings. The house remained silent. Michael and Vanessa wouldn't emerge for hours. Their late-night confrontation with my frozen message had undoubtedly disrupted their sleep, giving me the advantage of a clear mind and a head start. My first action was to check the refrigerator. The ice blocks remained, now partially thawed, the documents inside becoming more visible as water pooled beneath them. It was a fitting metaphor for my strategy. Evidence gradually revealing itself, the truth becoming clearer as time passed. By 6:15, I was dressed in a tailored Navy St. John suit that had served me well through countless negotiations. Image management had always been a critical component of corporate strategy. Appearing polished and authoritative set the tone before a single word was spoken. The doorbell rang precisely at 8:45. Michael and Vanessa were still asleep. Their late night and the emotional shock of finding their scheme literally on ice had ensured that. I opened the door to find James Harrington, my longtime legal counsel, accompanied by an elegant older woman with silver hair and a younger man carrying a leather medical bag. "Helen," James greeted me with the formal warmth we'd maintained through 30 years of professional collaboration. "May I present Dr. Eleanor Winters, the geriatric neuropsychologist we discussed, and Nathan Powell, our notary. Please come in," I welcomed them. "We have just over an hour before Michael and Vanessa typically appear on weekends." "Then let's waste no time," Dr. Winters said briskly, setting her briefcase on my living room table. "I understand you need a formal cognitive assessment to counter claims of diminished capacity." "Precisely," I confirmed. "They've manufactured documentation suggesting I'm seeing a Dr. Melton for cognitive decline, a doctor I've never met." While Dr. Winters administered her assessment, a comprehensive battery of memory tests, cognitive reasoning challenges, and executive function evaluations, James reviewed the fraudulent documents I'd rescued from the freezer. Nathan the notary prepared for his role in documenting today's proceedings. "These forgeries are skillful but detectable," James noted, examining the signatures under a small magnifying glass. "And filing these without your knowledge constitutes several felonies." "I don't necessarily want my son arrested," I clarified. "I want to regain control and understand how far this extends." James nodded, understanding the delicate balance I sought. "The emergency injunction I've prepared will freeze all transactions on the fraudulent accounts without immediately triggering criminal proceedings. That gives us time to negotiate." By 9:30, Dr. Winters had completed her evaluation, her expression professionally neutral, but with a hint of impressed surprise. "Mrs. Richardson, your cognitive function is not only normal for your age, but exceptionally high. Your executive reasoning skills test in the 98th percentile for any age group. Memory, verbal fluency, problem solving, all well above average." She prepared her formal report while Nathan notarized both her findings and my affidavit regarding the fraudulent documents. James assembled everything into a comprehensive legal package that would stop Michael's financial maneuvers in their tracks. "The banks and credit agencies have been notified," James confirmed, checking his phone. "All accounts with suspicious activity are locked pending investigation. Your original accounts should be restored to your sole control by end of business today." I heard movement upstairs, the shower running in the guest bathroom. "They're awake," I noted. "Excellent timing." James raised an eyebrow. "Would you like us to remain for the confrontation?" "No," I decided. "This first conversation should be family only, but perhaps remain available?" "We'll be at my office," Dr. Winters offered. "The documentation is complete, and quite frankly, Mrs. Richardson, I'd be happy to testify to your cognitive competence any time. Your mental acuity would put many of my 40-year-old patients to shame." After they departed, I moved to the kitchen and began preparing breakfast, my special blueberry pancakes that had been Michael's favorite since childhood. The familiar domestic routine centered me, providing a disarming setting for the confrontation to come. The ice blocks in the refrigerator had melted considerably, leaving the documents sodden but intact in their plastic covering. I left them there, a silent reminder of boundaries crossed. Michael entered the kitchen first, his expression wary. He wore sweatpants and a Harvard t-shirt, deliberately casual, perhaps trying to recapture simpler times. Vanessa followed moments later, her designer loungewear and full makeup suggesting she'd taken considerable time preparing for this confrontation. "Good morning," I greeted them pleasantly, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. "Coffee's fresh. Would either of you care for breakfast?" "Mom," Michael began, visibly uncomfortable. "About last night?" "Yes," I interjected, maintaining my calm demeanor. "We should discuss that. But first, you might want to check your phone. I believe your banking apps may be showing some notifications." The deliberate phrasing caught his attention. He pulled out his phone, Vanessa immediately leaning over to look. I watched their expressions transform from confusion to alarm as they scrolled through what were undoubtedly alerts about frozen accounts and suspended transactions. "What did you do?" Michael's voice held the same accusatory tone he'd used when caught misbehaving as a teenager. "I protected my assets," I replied simply, sliding pancakes onto 3 plates. "The same assets you attempted to misappropriate through fraudulent documentation." "That's not," Vanessa began, but I raised my hand, silencing her with the same authoritative gesture that had quieted over-aggressive pharmaceutical executives. "Let me be perfectly clear," I continued, my voice measured but firm. "I have been formally evaluated this morning by one of the state's leading geriatric neuropsychologists. I have signed affidavits from witnesses regarding the forgery of my signature, and I have documented evidence of financial fraud committed in my name." I set the plates on the kitchen island with deliberate precision. I could pursue criminal charges, identity theft, elder financial abuse, forgery, wire fraud. The potential sentences are quite severe. Michael's face had drained of color. Vanessa's carefully maintained composure began to crack. "But," I continued, taking my seat at the island, "I'd prefer to understand. So I'm offering you this opportunity to explain, Michael. Why, and perhaps more importantly, why did you believe you would succeed?" The question hung between us as Michael struggled to maintain eye contact. In the corporate world, I had learned that silence was often the most effective tool in negotiations. The first person to speak usually revealed their weakness. Michael broke first. "Mom, we were trying to help you. Your memory has been exceptional," I finished for him. "As documented by Dr. Winters this morning. Try again." Vanessa glanced toward the exit, clearly calculating whether to abandon this sinking ship or stay aboard. Her loyalty to Michael was apparently contingent on his access to my wealth. "The wedding is expensive," Michael finally admitted, his voice small. "The house we want in Beacon Hill is out of reach. My company's latest funding round didn't materialize. We needed a bridge." "A bridge," I repeated. "So you forged my signature, redirected my retirement funds, opened fraudulent credit accounts, and filed for guardianship, all for a bridge." "You wouldn't have understood," Vanessa interjected. "Your generation is so conservative with money. Michael deserves—" "Careful," I warned, my voice dropping to the quiet register that had made executive boardrooms fall silent. "Consider very carefully what you say next about what my son deserves." The kitchen fell silent, except for the clock ticking on the wall, the antique grandfather clock that Charles had lovingly restored, its mechanism as precise and unforgiving as my current strategy. "Here's what happens next," I informed them, cutting a perfect triangle from my pancake. "Finish your breakfast, pack your belongings, and be out of my house by noon." Michael's pancakes remained untouched as he stared at me with dawning comprehension that this was not a negotiation. It was a verdict. "You can't be serious," Michael protested, pushing away his untouched plate. "This is a family matter. We can work through this." I sipped my coffee, savoring both its warmth and the momentary silence before I responded. Throughout my career, I had learned that power often revealed itself in who could remain comfortable during uncomfortable conversations. "Family," I finally echoed, setting down my cup with precision. An interesting perspective from someone who forged my signature to steal my retirement. "It wasn't stealing," Vanessa interjected, her voice carrying the practiced indignation of someone accustomed to reshaping narratives. "It was asset protection. Michael is your son, your heir. We were simply accelerating the inevitable." "There's nothing inevitable about fraud," I countered calmly. "And inheritance isn't a right, it's a privilege you fundamentally compromised." Michael's face flushed, his expression cycling rapidly through disbelief, anger, and then, most telling, calculation. I recognized that look. I'd seen it across negotiating tables when opponents realized their initial strategy had failed and were scrambling for a new approach. "Mom," he began, his voice softening to the conciliatory tone he'd used since childhood when caught misbehaving. "We may have gone about this the wrong way, but our concerns are genuine. Dad would have wanted me to look after you." The invocation of Charles was a tactical error. I felt a cold clarity descend, the same mental state that had carried me through the most cutthroat corporate negotiations. "Your father," I said evenly, "kept separate financial records of every loan you never repaid. He tracked your pattern of escalating financial requests. Before he died, he specifically restructured our estate planning to ensure you couldn't access the principal of your trust until age 50. Michael's eyes widened slightly. This was clearly news to him. Charles had indeed been concerned about our son's financial responsibility, but had protected him from this knowledge to preserve their relationship. "I didn't know that," he admitted. "There's quite a bit you don't know," I informed him, "including the fact that this house is owned by an irrevocable trust with independent trustees, former colleagues from Westlake who would be fascinated to hear about your recent activities." This was only partially true. The house was indeed in a trust, but I maintained significant control. The exaggeration served its purpose, however. Michael's expression confirmed he hadn't investigated the property's ownership before attempting his financial coup. "You have until noon," I repeated, rising from my seat. "I have appointments this afternoon." "And if we refuse to leave?" Vanessa challenged, her perfectly manicured hand closing possessively over Michael's arm. I smiled thinly. "Then I place a single phone call, and the criminal complaints I'm currently withholding get filed immediately. Identity theft carries up to 15 years in Connecticut. Fraud against persons over 60 adds mandatory minimum sentencing." I checked my watch. "It's 10:17 now. I suggest you use your time efficiently." I left them sitting at the kitchen island, their half-eaten breakfast congealing on designer plates. In my study, I closed the door and immediately called Margaret. "They're packing," I reported. "Or at least they should be." "And if they don't?" Margaret asked, pragmatic as always. "Then we move to contingency plan B." "The criminal complaints?" "Not yet," I decided. "First the independent trustees, then the media contacts. Michael abhors public embarrassment more than legal consequences." Margaret's approval came through in her silence. We had worked together long enough to communicate in the spaces between words. "The banking freeze is complete," she confirmed after a moment. "James has obtained emergency injunctions against all the fraudulent accounts. The paperwork with Dr. Winter's evaluation has been filed with the probate court to invalidate the guardianship petition. You're secure financially." "But not personally," I noted. "Not yet." After ending the call, I moved to the window overlooking the circular driveway. Margaret was right. Financial security was only one dimension of what had been threatened. My son had attempted to erase my agency, my independence, my very selfhood. The frozen documents were merely symbols of a much deeper violation. At 11:52, I observed Michael loading suitcases into his BMW. Vanessa stood nearby, sunglasses obscuring her expression as she spoke intently into her phone. Their body language suggested tension, a rift forming between conspirators facing failure. I should have felt vindication, perhaps even satisfaction. Instead, a complex mixture of emotions washed through me. Relief at thwarting their scheme, certainly, but also a profound sadness. My only child had valued my wealth over my well-being, my assets over my autonomy. By noon, they had departed without further confrontation. I walked through the suddenly quiet house, noting small changes they'd already implemented during their stay. Furniture rearranged, artwork repositioned, my personal items subtly displaced to make room for Vanessa's expansive presence. In the guest room they'd occupied, a framed photo lay on the nightstand, Michael and Vanessa smiling in front of this very house, as if they already owned it. I placed it in a drawer, unable to discard it entirely despite everything. My phone rang, James calling with an update. "The emergency injunctions are in place," he confirmed. "But Helen, there's something else you should know. The Dr. Melton they referenced? She exists, and she did prepare cognitive evaluation documentation on you." "That's impossible," I replied. "I've never met her." "Exactly the problem," James agreed. She conducted an evaluation based on observed behaviors reported by Michael and Vanessa without ever examining you personally. Highly unethical, potentially illegal. Can we use this? Already am. I've filed a complaint with the medical board and included it in our documentation for the probate court. But Helen, he hesitated, uncharacteristic for James, who typically delivered even the worst news directly. What is it? I prompted. Michael has retained counsel. Patricia Sanderson. The name landed with weight. Patricia had been my contemporary at another pharmaceutical company, a ruthless litigator known for scorched earth tactics and personal vendettas. We had clashed during a patent dispute years ago, which Westlake ultimately won under my leadership. He's not backing down, I concluded. Apparently not. Sanderson has already filed counter-motions alleging that you're being manipulated by former colleagues with financial motivations. I absorbed this information silently, mentally revising my strategy. Michael wasn't retreating. He was regrouping. The confrontation was evolving from a family matter into a legal battle with my own son. What do you recommend? I asked, though I was already formulating my response. We need to document everything, James advised. Every fraudulent document, every unauthorized transaction, and we need to demonstrate your continued cognitive competence and independence beyond what Dr. Winters has already provided. Arrange it, I instructed. And James, contact Judge Hernandez. She serves on the Elder Protection Task Force and should know about Dr. Melton's irregular practices. After ending the call, I returned to the kitchen, where the melted ice blocks still sat in the refrigerator, the fraudulent documents now soaked but legible. I carefully removed them, placing each in a separate evidence bag, as James had instructed earlier. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. What had begun as a frozen shock tactic was transforming into methodical evidence collection. The ice had served its purpose as a dramatic opening gambit. Now precision would matter more than theatrics. I closed the refrigerator door with a sense of grim resolve. Michael had escalated by hiring Sanderson, signaling his intention to continue this battle despite the evidence against him. He had learned from me, after all, it seemed, just not the lessons I had hoped to impart. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Phase 2, ready when you are. I typed a simple reply. Proceed. The counterattack had begun. The morning after Michael and Vanessa's departure, my doorbell rang promptly at 9:01 a.m. I opened it to find a silver-haired man in a meticulously pressed suit, flanked by 2 younger associates carrying briefcases. Mrs. Richardson? Walter Cunningham, Forensic Accounting. He presented a business card embossed with the logo of one of the most prestigious financial investigation firms in the Northeast. Margaret Chen arranged our consultation. Of course, I replied, recognizing phase 2 of our strategy. Please come in. I led them to my home office, where I'd prepared files of financial records dating back 3 years, the period when Michael's borrowing had escalated from occasional requests to systematic extraction. Our preliminary review of your accounts already shows concerning patterns, Walter explained, his associates setting up laptops on my conference table. We need to establish the full extent of unauthorized transactions and document transfers. I've prepared everything Margaret requested, I said, indicating the organized files, tax returns, investment statements, property records, and my personal finance logs. Walter nodded approvingly. Most clients in your situation can't produce organized documentation. It significantly expedites our process. I've managed pharmaceutical acquisitions worth billions, I reminded him. Personal financial organization is considerably simpler. For the next 6 hours, we conducted a forensic dissection of my financial life. The picture that emerged was more disturbing than even I had suspected. Beyond the recent forged documents, the audit revealed a pattern of escalating financial manipulation dating back 18 months, coinciding precisely with Michael's engagement to Vanessa. Credit card charges authorized as a secondary user, Walter noted, highlighting transactions. Gradual increases in the amounts. Started with occasional dinners, evolved to jewelry purchases, then significant transfers to accounts we haven't yet identified. His associate, a young woman with the focused intensity I recognized from promising junior executives, pointed to another document. There's also evidence of information gathering. Multiple requests for account statements sent to email addresses not previously associated with your accounts. Password reset attempts. Classic preparation for identity theft, but executed slowly and methodically. The third team member, a digital forensics specialist, examined my computer and home network. Your email has been compromised, he confirmed. Sophisticated forwarding rules were established 9 months ago. Copies of anything containing keywords like account, statement, or password were automatically sent to an external address. Michael has always been tech-savvy, I acknowledged, remembering how proudly I'd once described my son's computer skills to colleagues. The systematic nature of the betrayal settled over me like a physical weight. This wasn't an impulsive act of financial desperation. It was a calculated campaign that had been building for well over a year, a premeditated betrayal by the child I had raised. The good news, Walter continued, is that we can document everything. The timeline, the escalation pattern, the digital evidence. If this goes to litigation or prosecution, it's unambiguous. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, I replied, though my confidence in an amicable resolution was fading with each new revelation. My phone rang. James Harrington calling with an update. Helen, we have a situation. Patricia Sanderson has filed for an emergency hearing regarding your competency. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., before Judge Whitaker. Whitaker? The name was unfamiliar to me. New to the probate division. Young, ambitious, known for conservative interpretations of guardianship statutes. She's venue shopping, I realized, recognizing the tactic from corporate litigation. Finding a potentially sympathetic judge. Precisely. We need to prepare you for testimony. They'll try to provoke emotional responses, confusion, anything to support their narrative of cognitive decline. I glanced at the forensic team, still cataloging evidence of Michael's systematic betrayal. I'll be ready. And James? Bring the bank records showing the timing of withdrawals coinciding with Vanessa's shopping sprees. Let's make their motivations explicit. After ending the call, I briefed Walter on this new development. A competency hearing is actually advantageous, he observed. It gives us a formal venue to introduce all this evidence ahead of any potential criminal complaints. I don't want criminal charges against my son, I reminded him, though my resolve on this point was weakening with each new discovery. Walter's expression remained professionally neutral. With respect, Mrs. Richardson, that may not remain your choice. Financial abuse of seniors exceeding certain thresholds triggers mandatory reporting requirements. What we're documenting here crosses those thresholds significantly. The clinical assessment landed heavily. I had spent the day thinking of this as a betrayal of trust, a family conflict, a disappointment in the child I'd raised. Now it was being correctly categorized as what it truly was, a crime with potential legal consequences beyond my control. By late afternoon, the forensic team had compiled their preliminary findings into a comprehensive report. The total financial impact approached $1, $2 million, some through direct unauthorized transfers, others through forged credit applications, still others through manipulated investment instructions. This level of financial exploitation is unusually sophisticated, Walter noted as they prepared to leave. Most cases we see involve impulsive withdrawals or obvious forgeries. This was executed with corporate-level planning. He learned from watching me, I acknowledged, the irony not lost on me. My son had applied my business acumen toward victimizing me. After the forensic team departed, I sat alone in my study, reviewing their findings and preparing mentally for tomorrow's hearing. The house felt cavernous and empty, the silence broken only by the steady tick of Charles's grandfather clock from the foyer. I found myself studying a family photo on my desk, Michael's graduation from Harvard Business School, Charles and I flanking him proudly. The confidence in my son's smile, the optimism we all felt that day, now seemed like artifacts from another lifetime. My phone chimed with a text from Margaret. "Dinner? You shouldn't be alone tonight." I typed back, "Thank you, but I need this evening to prepare. Court tomorrow at 10. Sanderson is pursuing competency hearing." Her response was immediate. "She'll regret that. No one who's faced you in a boardroom would question your competence. I'll be there." As darkness fell outside my windows, I methodically organized my thoughts and evidence for tomorrow's confrontation. Patricia Sanderson was formidable, but she had only Michael's fabricated concerns and a questionable medical assessment from a doctor who had never examined me. I had 4 decades of corporate leadership, a documented history of financial acumen, and now incontrovertible evidence of a systematic attempt to defraud me. If Michael wanted a courtroom battle with his mother, I would give him one he'd never forget. The Richardson family business had always been pharmaceuticals. Tomorrow, the business would be truth, administered in doses my son might find difficult to swallow. The probate courtroom was smaller than I had anticipated, more intimate than the corporate boardrooms where I'd spent my career. Judge Whitaker presided from a modestly elevated bench, her youth evident despite efforts to project gravitas through stern expressions and deliberate movements. I sat beside James at the petitioner's table, dressed in a conservative St. John suit in deep burgundy, authoritative without appearing overly aggressive. Margaret occupied the front row directly behind us, alongside Dr. Winters and Walter Cunningham. Michael and Vanessa entered with Patricia Sanderson moments before proceedings began. My son avoided my gaze, but Vanessa stared directly at me with an expression of practiced concern that might have appeared genuine to those who didn't know better. She had dressed for the role of worried future daughter-in-law in a modest navy dress, her usual statement jewelry notably absent. "All rise," the clerk announced as Judge Whitaker entered. The preliminary formalities proceeded efficiently until Judge Whitaker addressed the purpose of the hearing. "We're here regarding petition number 2023 CV 4872, Richardson v. Richardson, concerning the proposed guardianship of Helen Elizabeth Richardson." Patricia Sanderson rose immediately. "Your Honor, we've filed an emergency motion for temporary guardianship pending full evaluation. My clients have documented serious concerns about Mrs. Richardson's cognitive state and financial decision-making capacity." James countered smoothly. "Your Honor, we have comprehensive evidence demonstrating these claims are not only false but fraudulent, including documentation of financial exploitation by the very parties claiming concern." Judge Whitaker raised an eyebrow. "Serious allegations on both sides. Miss Sanderson, you may present your case." Sanderson called her first witness, not Michael, but a slender woman in her 50s with an austere appearance and the careful posture of someone accustomed to testifying. "Please state your name and credentials," Sanderson instructed. "Dr. Evelyn Melton. I am a geriatric psychiatrist specializing in cognitive disorders and elder care. I have been in practice for 23 years and currently serve as a consultant for the State Elder Services Division." I leaned toward James, whispering, "The doctor I supposedly saw but never met." He nodded slightly, making notes as Dr. Melton described her evaluation of my condition, all based on reported behaviors from Michael and Vanessa, without a single direct interaction with me. Based on the reported symptoms, increasing forgetfulness, difficulty managing finances, paranoid ideation, and emotional lability, I provided a preliminary assessment of mild to moderate cognitive decline requiring supervision, she concluded. James rose for cross-examination, his approach deceptively conversational. "Dr. Melton, when did you personally examine Mrs. Richardson?" The doctor shifted slightly. "As I explained, my assessment was based on reported symptoms from family members, which is standard practice for initial consultations. So you never actually met Mrs. Richardson? Never spoke with her? Never administered any cognitive tests directly?" "No, but yes or no will suffice, doctor," James interrupted firmly. "You never met Mrs. Richardson before today, correct?" "Correct," she admitted. "And in your 23 years of practice, have you ever testified in a guardianship proceeding based solely on family reports without examining the subject personally?" Dr. Melton hesitated. "This is an unusual case." "Indeed it is," James agreed. "One more question. Are you aware that filing medical opinions without direct examination could potentially violate Connecticut Medical Board regulations?" Sanderson objected immediately. "Counsel is badgering the witness and making legal conclusions outside his expertise." "I'll rephrase," James offered smoothly. "Dr. Melton, are you familiar with Connecticut Medical Board Regulation 19.4 regarding requirements for capacity evaluations in guardianship proceedings?" The doctor's complexion paled slightly. "I would need to review the specific regulation." James nodded, as if her answer confirmed something important. "No further questions at this time, Your Honor, though we reserve the right to recall Dr. Melton after our experts testify." Sanderson's strategy became clearer with her next witness, a bank manager who testified about unusual transactions from my accounts, carefully framed to suggest erratic decision-making rather than unauthorized access. James's cross-examination quickly established that the manager had only interacted with Michael regarding my accounts, never with me directly. Finally, Michael took the stand, the moment I had been dreading yet anticipating. He had shaved his usual stubble and wore a conservative suit that reminded me painfully of Charles. As he was sworn in, his eyes briefly met mine, then darted away. Sanderson led him through carefully prepared testimony about his growing concerns over the past year, missed appointments I had supposedly forgotten, confusion about financial matters, and most recently, the bizarre behavior of freezing documents in the refrigerator. "I'm just worried about her," Michael concluded, his voice catching theatrically. "Mom has always been so sharp, so in control. Seeing this decline, it's heartbreaking. I'm only trying to protect her." Judge Whitaker's expression softened slightly at this performance, exactly as Sanderson had undoubtedly intended. "Cross-examination?" the judge prompted. James approached unhurriedly. "Mr. Richardson, you testified about your mother's supposed cognitive decline. When did you first notice these concerns?" "About a year ago," Michael replied. "Little things at first, then becoming more noticeable." "Interesting timing," James noted. "Approximately when you became engaged to Ms. Calloway, correct?" "Objection," Sanderson interjected. "Relevance." "I'll allow it," Judge Whitaker ruled, "but counsel should establish relevance quickly." James continued. "Mr. Richardson, in the past 18 months, how much money have you borrowed from your mother?" Michael shifted uncomfortably. "I don't keep exact records of family financial arrangements. Fortunately, your mother does," James replied, presenting a document. "Exhibit 14, Your Honor. A record of transfers from Helen Richardson's accounts to Michael Richardson totaling $427,000 over 18 months. He let that number hang in the air before continuing. "Now, when exactly did you decide your mother was incapable of managing her finances? Before or after she began questioning these escalating loans?" "Objection," Sanderson stood. "Counsel is testifying and implying improper motives without foundation." "I'll rephrase," James offered. "Mr. Richardson, did your concerns about your mother's cognitive abilities intensify after she questioned transfers from her account to yours in March of this year?" Michael's jaw tightened. "The timing is coincidental." "Is it?" James presented another document. Exhibit 15, Your Honor. Email correspondence between Mr. Richardson and Ms. Calloway, dated March 17th, where they discuss, and I quote, "contingency plans if Mom becomes difficult about the house down payment." The color drained from Michael's face. I felt a complex mixture of vindication and heartache as my son's carefully constructed narrative began unraveling. "Mr. Richardson," James continued relentlessly, "did you forge your mother's signature on bank transfer authorizations dated April 3rd of this year?" "Objection," Sanderson practically shouted. "Counsel is accusing the witness of criminal conduct." "Your Honor," James responded calmly. Exhibit 16 contains the forensic handwriting analysis confirming the forgery, along with bank surveillance footage showing Mr. Richardson submitting these documents in person. Judge Whitaker's expression had transformed from sympathetic to troubled. "Ms. Sanderson, these allegations are serious and appear well documented." "Your Honor," Sanderson attempted, "even if there were financial irregularities, they don't negate legitimate concerns about Mrs. Richardson's condition." "Then perhaps," Judge Whitaker suggested, "we should hear from Mrs. Richardson herself." As I rose to take the stand, I caught Michael's eye. For the first time since this ordeal began, I saw something beyond calculation or entitlement in his expression, the dawning realization that he had grievously underestimated his mother. The corporate world had taught me that some battles are won before testimony begins, through preparation and documentary evidence. As I was sworn in, I knew this would be one of those battles. I had raised my son, but I had also built and protected a pharmaceutical empire against more formidable opponents than Patricia Sanderson. And unlike those corporate adversaries, I knew exactly where my son had learned his tactics and where the flaws in his strategy lay. "Please state your name for the record," the clerk instructed. "Helen Elizabeth Richardson," I replied, my voice steady and clear. Judge Whitaker studied me with increased interest now that the petitioner herself was on the stand. I met her gaze directly, maintaining the composed presence that had served me through decades of high-stakes corporate testimony. James began with establishing questions about my background, education, and career, a methodical foundation demonstrating my lifelong pattern of competence and achievement. I responded with precision, citing specific dates, figures, and accomplishments without hesitation. "Mrs. Richardson," James continued, "could you describe your typical day?" "I rise at 5:30 a.m., I began. I review market reports over breakfast, then exercise for 45 minutes. 3 days a week, I consult with female-led pharmaceutical startups from 9 to noon. Tuesdays, I attend board meetings for the Richardson Foundation. Thursdays are reserved for financial management, reviewing investments, authorizing transactions, and consulting with my advisors. Evenings often include social engagements or work with the cultural organizations where I volunteer. Does that sound like the schedule of someone experiencing cognitive decline? James asked. Objection, Sanderson called out. Leading. Sustained, Judge Whitaker ruled. James nodded, redirecting smoothly. Mrs. Richardson, are you familiar with the concept of financial exploitation of elders? Very familiar, I confirmed. I serve on the advisory council for the Connecticut Elder Justice Coalition, which specifically addresses such abuse. I helped develop their financial protection protocols. This information was clearly new to Judge Whitaker, whose eyebrows rose slightly. When did you first become aware that your financial autonomy was being compromised? James asked. I leaned slightly forward, addressing my answer to the judge rather than to James. Approximately 4 months ago, I noticed unusual transactions in my accounts, withdrawals I hadn't authorized, statements being redirected. Initially, I attributed these to banking errors. Upon investigation with my financial advisors, we discovered systematic unauthorized access. And what actions did you take? I implemented enhanced security protocols, changed all passwords, and initiated a comprehensive audit of my accounts. The forensic accounting team identified a pattern of escalating financial exploitation, totaling approximately $1.2 million over 18 months. The figure caused a stir in the courtroom. Judge Whitaker glanced toward Michael, whose gaze was now fixed firmly on the table before him. Would you describe the refrigerator incident that your son characterized as bizarre behavior? James prompted. For the first time, I allowed a slight smile. When confronted with fraudulent documents bearing forged signatures, I chose a dramatic but controlled response. I preserved the evidence by freezing the documents, ensuring they couldn't be destroyed, while also sending a clear message that I was aware of the deception. It was a strategic decision, not an irrational one. Strategic, James repeated thoughtfully. A word that has characterized your professional approach for decades. Objection, Sanderson interrupted. Counsel is testifying. Sustained, Judge Whitaker agreed. Continue with questions, Mr. Harrington. James nodded, then shifted direction. Mrs. Richardson, have you ever met with Dr. Evelyn Melton? Never, I stated firmly. Until today, I had never seen nor spoken with Dr. Melton, despite her testimony about my supposed condition. One final question, James concluded. If this court were to grant your son's petition for guardianship, what would be at stake for you personally? I took a measured breath, considering my words carefully. Beyond the $32 million in assets that would fall under his control, what's at stake is my fundamental dignity and autonomy. I built a career breaking barriers for women in corporate leadership. I raised a son as a working mother when that was far from common. I've managed complex global operations and navigated corporate crises. To have my capacity questioned, not because of genuine cognitive decline, but as a strategy to access my assets, that is an attempt to erase not just my financial independence, but my very identity. James nodded, satisfied. No further questions, Your Honor. Patricia Sanderson approached for cross-examination, her expression calculating. I had faced this look before from opposing counsel, attempting to unsettle witnesses through unexpected angles of attack. Mrs. Richardson, she began, you've presented yourself as extraordinarily competent today, yet your son has observed concerning behaviors that you haven't addressed. For instance, have you ever found household items in unusual places? Keys in the refrigerator, perhaps? No, I replied simply. Have you missed important appointments in recent months? I have not. Mrs. Richardson, Sanderson continued, changing tactics, isn't it possible that your perception of these events is colored by paranoia? That what you see as a conspiracy is actually your loving son attempting to help you? I met her gaze directly. Miss Sanderson, I spent 40 years evaluating pharmaceutical acquisition targets. My job required distinguishing between accurate data and manipulated projections, between authentic value and artificial inflation. Those same analytical skills allow me to recognize the difference between genuine concern and financial opportunism. Yet you admit freezing documents in your refrigerator, Sanderson pressed. seizing on what she clearly viewed as my most vulnerable point. Most people would consider that unusual behavior. Most people haven't had their financial autonomy threatened through forged documents, I countered evenly. The standard for evaluating behavior must include context. In context, my response was proportional and effective. It preserved evidence while confronting the perpetrators directly. Sanderson tried several more approaches, questioning my memory of specific dates, suggesting emotional distress after Charles's death had affected my judgment, even implying that my career achievements had perhaps created an inability to acknowledge limitations that came with aging. To each attempt, I responded with the same measured precision I'd used when defending Westlake's strategies to skeptical board members or hostile regulators. The skills honed through decades of corporate leadership served me now in the most personal battle of my life. Finally, seemingly frustrated by her inability to provoke a confused or emotional response, Sanderson concluded her cross-examination. Judge Whitaker called a brief recess before closing arguments. As I returned to the petitioner's table, I caught Margaret's eye in the front row. She gave me a subtle nod of approval, the same signal we had used after particularly effective presentations during our corporate years. James leaned close as I sat down. "Textbook testimony," he murmured. "You didn't give Sanderson a single opening. She's making the same mistake Michael did," I observed quietly, assuming that age equates to vulnerability. When court resumed, both attorneys presented closing arguments. Sanderson emphasized familial concern and cited medical opinions, while attempting to frame the financial evidence as a distraction from legitimate cognitive issues. James, in contrast, systematically dismantled their case, highlighting the absence of direct medical evaluation, the timeline correlation between my questioning Michael's financial requests and his sudden concerns about my competence, and the documented evidence of forgery and unauthorized transactions. Judge Whitaker listened attentively to both sides before addressing the courtroom. "I've heard sufficient testimony to make a determination without further deliberation." The courtroom fell silent as she continued. "Petitions for guardianship require clear and convincing evidence of incapacity. Not only has this burden not been met, but substantial evidence suggests this petition was filed for improper purposes." She turned her attention directly to Michael. "Mr. Richardson, this court takes a very dim view of using guardianship proceedings as a mechanism for financial exploitation. Based on the evidence presented today, I am not only denying your petition, but referring this matter to the Elder Protective Services Division for further investigation." The formal language did little to obscure her meaning. Michael's attempt to seize control had not only failed, but potentially exposed him to investigation. "This matter is dismissed," Judge Whitaker concluded, striking her gavel with finality. As we rose to leave, Michael finally met my gaze directly. In his expression, I saw something unexpected. Not just the shock of defeat, but a flicker of recognition, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Whether that recognition would lead to remorse remained to be seen. For now, I had won something precious, continued agency over my life and finances certainly, but also vindication of the competence and strategic thinking that had defined my existence. Outside the courthouse, Margaret took my arm as photographers from local media approached. "Victory drinks?" she suggested. "Not yet," I replied, watching Michael and Vanessa exit separately, their body language suggesting discord. "The battle's won, but the war isn't over." My son had made his opening move and lost decisively. Now it was my turn to determine the next phase of our relationship, or whether there would be one at all. The media coverage following the hearing was mercifully brief but pointed. The Greenwich Times ran a small piece titled "Richardson Heirs Guardianship Petition Denied." Notable primarily for its restraint, James had called in favors to minimize details that might humiliate Michael publicly. Local legal blogs proved less discreet, with one describing the case as a textbook example of attempted elder financial exploitation thwarted by the intended victim's superior preparation. I returned to my home after the hearing to find it eerily quiet, as if the house itself were processing the events of recent weeks. Charles's grandfather clock ticked steadily in the foyer, a reassuring rhythm that had anchored our family life for decades. I moved through the rooms, reclaiming each space mentally, no longer seeing them through the lens of Michael and Vanessa's presumptive ownership. In my study, I sat at my desk and opened the bottom drawer where I kept personal correspondence. Among the letters was a sealed envelope in Charles's handwriting, marked, "For Helen, when Michael disappoints you deeply." My husband had known our son better than I had allowed myself to. I broke the seal, unfolding a single page written in Charles's distinctive script. "Helen, if you're reading this, Michael has finally pushed beyond your generous maternal boundaries. I've watched you excuse his financial irresponsibility for years, covering for him as you've covered for no one else in your life. Your capacity for forgiveness where he's concerned has always both moved and concerned me. You and I built different relationships with our son. You saw his potential. I saw his patterns. Both perspectives hold truth. Whatever he's done to prompt opening this letter, remember, you did not fail as a mother. Some lessons cannot be taught. They must be lived. Perhaps this moment, painful as it may be, offers Michael his best chance at genuine growth. Handle this as you've handled every challenge, with clear eyes, strategic thinking, and the compassion that has always balanced your formidable strength. All my love, Charles." A single tear dropped onto the page before I could prevent it. Charles had anticipated this moment years ago, understanding both Michael's vulnerabilities and my blind spot where our son was concerned. My phone interrupted this reflection, Margaret calling with an update. "Walter's team has recovered another $240,000 from the unidentified accounts," she reported. "That brings the total recovered to just over $800,000. "And the remaining $400,000? I asked. "Vanessa's shopping habits appear to be the primary culprit," Margaret replied with poorly disguised disdain. "Luxury purchases mostly. Designer everything, travel, some questionable business investments through her PR firm. James is preparing demand letters." I processed this information, remembering Vanessa's carefully curated social media showcasing her supposedly self-made success. Clothes, accessories, and lifestyle largely funded, it seemed, by my accounts. "Has Michael attempted contact?" Margaret asked after a moment. "Nothing yet," I confirmed. "And Vanessa?" "Apparently furious. My sources say she's blaming Michael for botching what she called a straightforward financial consolidation. They're staying separately. He's at the Marriott. She's with a friend in Manhattan." The clinical term financial consolidation for what had been an attempted theft of my autonomy spoke volumes about Vanessa's perspective. "Helen," Margaret continued, hesitation evident in her voice, "what's your endgame here? Criminal charges are still on the table. The evidence would support them." It was the question I had been wrestling with since the hearing concluded. What did justice look like in this situation? What did I want the outcome to be for my only child? "I'm still determining that," I admitted. "Part of me wants accountability. Another part still sees him as your son," Margaret finished when my voice trailed off. "Understandable. But Helen, Charles would want you protected first." "I know," I acknowledged, glancing at his letter still open before me. After ending the call, I moved to the kitchen, suddenly reminded I hadn't eaten since before the hearing. Opening the refrigerator, now devoid of ice blocks and fraudulent documents, I found it nearly empty. The mundane reality of needing groceries felt almost comical after the high-stakes legal battle of the morning. I was contemplating a delivery order when the doorbell rang. Through the security monitor, I saw Michael standing alone on my porch. No Vanessa in sight. He carried nothing, his posture uncharacteristically hesitant. For a moment, I considered not answering. The court victory was clear. There was no legal necessity for further engagement. Yet something, perhaps Charles's letter, perhaps my own unresolved questions, compelled me to press the intercom. "Yes? Mom?" Michael's voice carried through the speaker. "Could we talk?" "Just talk." I studied his image on the monitor. He looked diminished somehow, the confident facade cracked to reveal something more vulnerable beneath. Still, I had been fooled by his performances before. "Are you recording this conversation, Michael? Is this another attempt to document supposed cognitive issues?" The question clearly startled him. "No, God, no. I need to understand what happens now." What happens now? The question that had occupied my thoughts since the gavel fell. I made my decision and pressed the door release. Michael entered cautiously, as if expecting traps. In my kitchen, the scene of our confrontation over the frozen documents, he stood awkwardly, unsure of his place in this home where he had grown up. "Sit," I instructed, indicating the kitchen island. He complied without argument, a novelty in our recent interactions. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, but necessary. Why? I finally asked. The single word contained multitudes. Michael stared at his hands, now clasped before him on the counter. It started small, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Using your card for business dinners when mine was maxed out. Then the house down payment fell through because my credit wasn't sufficient for the mortgage we wanted. Vanessa was disappointed. So you decided to take control of my assets, I stated, not as an accusation but as a confirmation. It sounds terrible when you say it directly, he admitted. We had a narrative that made it seem justified, that you were slipping, that we were protecting you, that it was just accelerating an inevitable transition. He looked up, meeting my gaze. I started believing it myself. The forgeries? I prompted. Vanessa knew someone, he acknowledged, a consultant who specializes in document management for wealthy families with aging parents. It seemed common, like something people just did. The casual immorality of it, the normalization of elder exploitation in his social circle, struck me as perhaps more disturbing than if it had been his idea alone. The court could have referred this for criminal prosecution, I informed him. Still could. He nodded, a slight tremor visible in his hands. I know. 1.2 million, Michael. Not casual borrowing, not financial assistance, systematic theft. I'll pay it back, he offered immediately. All of it. I'll liquidate my investments, sell my car. Your assets don't come close to covering it, I interrupted. And this isn't just about money. You attempted to erase me as a person, to reduce me from your mother, a woman who built a career, who helped raise you, who has thoughts and agency and capabilities, to a resource to be managed and exploited. For the first time, genuine emotion broke through his carefully maintained facade. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted, his voice cracking. I don't know if it can be fixed. The raw uncertainty in his voice reminded me suddenly, painfully of him at 8 years old, confessing to breaking Charles's cherished model ship, terrified of consequences, but more afraid of losing his father's trust. Neither do I acknowledged, but the fact that you're asking that question, rather than presenting another strategic narrative, suggests at least the possibility of a beginning. Outside, rain began falling softly against the windows, nature providing a gentle soundtrack to this fragile moment of potential reconciliation or final separation between mother and son. Rain intensified outside as Michael and I sat in weighted silence, the kitchen island between us like a negotiation table. For decades, I had brokered deals between pharmaceutical giants, navigated hostile takeovers, and restructured failing divisions. Now I was applying those same skills to something far more personal, determining the future of my relationship with my only child. I need you to understand something fundamental, I finally said. This isn't a problem to be managed away with the right words or temporary contrition. Your actions revealed a profound moral failing. Michael flinched, but didn't dispute this assessment. Your father worried about this, I continued, gesturing toward Charles's letter on the counter where I'd placed it. Not the specific scenario of you trying to seize control of my finances, but your tendency to prioritize convenience over character. He saw it as your greatest vulnerability. Dad knew? His voice carried genuine surprise. Charles missed very little, I confirmed. He hoped you'd outgrow it. I enabled you to avoid confronting it. Michael glanced at the letter, but didn't reach for it. May I ask what happens now? Legally, I mean. That depends partly on you, I replied. The Elder Protection Unit has opened an investigation based on the judge's referral. The forensic accounting evidence is comprehensive. Criminal charges remain a possibility. His face paled. And that decision is not entirely mine, I clarified. But my cooperation or lack thereof will influence the process. The corporate negotiator in me recognized this moment, when leverage is established and terms can be meaningfully discussed. Michael seemed to sense it too, his posture straightening slightly as we entered more familiar territory. What would you need from me? He asked. First, absolute transparency, I stated firmly. A complete accounting of every unauthorized transaction, every document forged, every account accessed, names of anyone who assisted you, the full extent of Vanessa's involvement. He nodded, though I noted hesitation at the mention of Vanessa. I can provide that. Second, a formal legally binding restitution agreement, I continued. The full $1.2 million plus interest on a payment schedule that will likely extend for years. Agreed. he said quickly, too quickly, suggesting he'd expected worse. Third, professional counseling. Not just financial counseling, though that's certainly needed, but therapeutic intervention addressing the ethical breakdown that led you here. This requirement visibly discomforted him. Michael had always resisted introspection, preferring external solutions to internal reckonings. But after a moment, he nodded again. And fourth, I paused, considering how to articulate this final condition. Distance. Distance? Alarm flickered across his features. I mean a structured separation while these other conditions are implemented, I clarified. No unscheduled visits, no financial requests, limited contact on my terms while I evaluate whether trust can ever be rebuilt. The rain drummed harder against the windows as Michael absorbed these requirements. In his expression, I saw calculation giving way to the dawning realization that this was not a negotiation he could finesse. And if I agree to all of this, he finally asked, then I will decline to press criminal charges and will cooperate minimally with the elder protection investigation, I stated. I will provide a victim impact statement acknowledging your acceptance of responsibility and commitment to restitution. And our relationship? Eventually? I studied my son's face, the features that echoed Charles's, the expressions that were uniquely his own. That will depend on actions, not promises, on demonstrated change, not declared intentions. The corporate world had taught me the difference between binding agreements and aspirational language. Michael needed to understand that our personal relationship couldn't be negotiated like a business settlement. I understand, he said, though whether he truly did remained to be seen. I'll do whatever it takes, Mom. Starting with? I prompted, testing whether he had absorbed the priorities I'd outlined. Full disclosure, he answered correctly. I can provide a complete accounting of everything, tonight, if you want. I nodded, satisfied with this initial demonstration of comprehension. Tomorrow will be sufficient. Have it notarized. Include everything, Michael. The investigation will uncover whatever you omit, and any intentional omission voids our agreement. As if on cue, my phone chimed with an incoming text. I glanced at the screen to see a message from Walter Cunningham. New accounts identified in Cayman Islands. Approximately $340,000 additional funds transferred. Details to follow. I placed the phone screen up on the counter, deliberately visible to Michael. His expression confirmed what the message suggested. There was more to uncover than he had admitted thus far. The forensic team is quite thorough, I noted mildly. Perhaps you should reconsider what everything encompasses before finalizing your disclosure. A flush of shame colored his face. The offshore accounts were Vanessa's idea, he offered weakly. A contingency plan if the guardianship petition failed. Vanessa may have suggested it, I countered, but you executed it. The distinction matters little to me, and even less to prosecutors. Thunder rumbled outside, nature's punctuation to an increasingly tense conversation. Michael's phone buzzed repeatedly in his pocket, but he made no move to check it. That would be Vanessa, I surmised. Wondering how your conversation with me is progressing, whether you've secured an agreement to avoid charges. His slight wince confirmed my assessment. She's concerned. As she should be, I replied evenly. The forensic evidence suggests she was more than a passive beneficiary. The emails between you two outline quite a deliberate strategy. Michael's expression shifted subtly, a flicker of something that might have been doubt regarding his fiancée. She was very invested in the outcome. In my money, you mean, I corrected. Has it occurred to you that her interest in marriage might correlate directly with her awareness of your potential inheritance? Mom, that's not fair, he protested, but without his usual conviction. Vanessa loves me. Perhaps she does, I allowed. But love and financial opportunism aren't mutually exclusive. I've observed her calculating approach since your engagement. Charles would have recognized it immediately. Michael glanced again at his father's unread letter, something vulnerable crossing his features. Dad never seemed particularly impressed with any of my girlfriends, because he valued substance over appearance, I said quietly. Character over charm. The rain had slowed to a gentle patter, the storm moving past. Similarly, the intensity of our confrontation had ebbed, leaving space for more reflective conversation. I'd like you to take your father's letter with you, I decided, sliding it toward him. Read it when you're alone. It may offer perspective as you prepare your disclosure. Michael reached for the letter with uncharacteristic reverence, carefully placing it in his jacket pocket. Thank you. One more thing, I added as he stood to leave. I want access to the full correspondence between you and Vanessa regarding this situation. Not summarized, not excerpted. Everything. His hesitation was brief but noticeable. Some of it is unflattering. To both of us. I'm sure it is, I replied. Include it anyway. At the front door, Michael paused. For what it's worth, I am sorry, Mom. Not just for getting caught, but for all of it. Show me, I responded simply. Words are easy. Demonstrated change is what matters now. After he left, I remained in the foyer, listening to the diminishing rain and the steady tick of Charles's clock. The confrontation had drained me more than any corporate negotiation ever had. Unlike business dealings, this couldn't be compartmentalized. The stakes were too personal, the betrayal too intimate. I moved to the living room window, watching Michael's car disappear down the driveway. The sodden landscape mirrored my emotional state, weathered by storm, but gradually clearing. In the garden, early spring bulbs Charles had planted years ago were pushing through the soil despite the unseasonable rain, persistent life emerging after dormancy. My phone rang, Margaret checking in after seeing Walter's update about the Cayman accounts. Michael was here, I informed her. We've established preliminary terms. Terms? She repeated, her tone suggesting concern. Helen, this isn't a business transaction. Everything is a transaction of some kind, I replied, the wisdom earned through decades in corporate America. The currency just varies. In this case, it's trust, accountability, and potential reconciliation being exchanged. And Vanessa? Margaret asked. She's the architect behind much of this. A theory I'm testing, I acknowledged. I've required full disclosure of their correspondence. I suspect what I find will clarify her role, and perhaps open Michael's eyes as well. You're giving him a chance to salvage his freedom and possibly your relationship, Margaret observed, more than many would offer after such betrayal. Not giving, I corrected. Offering the opportunity to earn, which is entirely different. After ending the call, I returned to my study and opened my laptop. The elder protection investigator had requested a preliminary statement by tomorrow. As I began typing, I realized I was approaching this document not just as a victim's account, but as a mother's balanced assessment, acknowledging the betrayal while creating space for potential redemption. Whether Michael would navigate that space successfully remained to be seen. But for the first time since discovering the frozen documents, I allowed myself to consider the possibility of eventual reconciliation. Not a return to what was, but the creation of something new, built on clearer boundaries and earned respect rather than assumed entitlement. Charles would have approved of this measured approach. Not naive forgiveness, but strategic opportunity for genuine growth. A final lesson from parent to child, offered from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. 3 months after the hearing, I sat in my garden reviewing the quarterly forensic accounting report. Walter Cunningham's team had systematically traced and recovered nearly all of the misappropriated funds, $17 million of the original $1.2 million, through a combination of reverse transactions, liquidated assets, and formal restitution from Michael's accounts. The garden provided perfect symmetry for this moment of reckoning. Charles had always said gardens were nature's balance sheets, investments of effort yielding measurable returns, losses and gains visible in each season's progression. Today, his beloved peonies were in full bloom, their heavy pink and white blossoms nodding in the June breeze. My phone chimed with a reminder. Michael's monthly check-in was scheduled for 2 p.m. Following our agreement, these meetings occurred at precise intervals, not casual drop-ins, but structured appointments reflecting the formal nature of our rebuilding process. At exactly 2 the doorbell rang. Michael's punctuality, once haphazard, had become rigorous under our new arrangement. I observed him through the security monitor before buzzing him in, noting the subtle changes in his appearance. Gone was the designer stubble and carefully tousled hair, replaced by a cleaner look reminiscent of his father. His clothing, too, had shifted from status brands to simpler, quality pieces. "Good afternoon, Mom," he greeted me with the careful formality that characterized our interactions now. "Michael," I acknowledged, leading him to the garden terrace where I had set up tea. "How was your meeting with Dr. Callahan yesterday?" He settled into a chair across from me, accepting the offered cup. "Challenging," he admitted. "We're addressing my tendency toward expedient decisions rather than ethical ones. tracing it back to childhood patterns. Dr. Callahan, the therapist specified in our agreement, specialized in ethical decision-making and financial psychology. Michael's weekly sessions were documented and summarized as part of our arrangement, not to invade his privacy, but to verify his commitment to the process. "And the financial counseling?" I inquired. "The budget is holding," he reported with a hint of pride. "Living within my actual income requires adjustments, but it's clarifying. I've terminated the lease on the Beacon Hill apartment and found something more appropriate in Somerville." I nodded, noting the absence of resentment in his tone. Early in this process, such statements had carried undercurrents of martyrdom, subtle implications that his sacrifices should be recognized and rewarded. That performative quality had gradually diminished as genuine accountability took root. "I've reviewed the forensic report," I told him, sliding the document across the table. "The recovery process is nearly complete. The remaining $30,000 appears to be unrecoverable, spent on consumables and services." Michael examined the report, his expression sober. "I'll continue payments according to the schedule until the full amount is restored," he affirmed. "Even the unrecoverable portion." We sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping tea as bees moved industriously among the peonies. In the distance, a lawnmower hummed, normal suburban sounds that seemed almost miraculous after the chaos of recent months. "I haven't heard from Vanessa since the engagement ended," Michael offered, venturing into territory we rarely discussed. "Her lawyer communicates with James about the separated assets, but she's apparently relocated to Los Angeles." The dissolution of their engagement had followed inevitably after Michael provided me with their complete correspondence as required. The emails and texts had revealed Vanessa's calculated approach to our family wealth, including explicit strategies for transitioning management of my assets once they were married. Her commentary on me had been particularly illuminating, referring to me as the obstacle and detailing plans for my eventual placement in an assisted living facility, regardless of my cognitive status. I had provided the documentation to Michael without comment. Some truths required no elaboration. "Have you processed that loss?" I asked carefully. He considered the question with the newfound thoughtfulness that had emerged during his therapy. "It wasn't really a loss," he finally replied. "More an awakening. I was involved with the idea of Vanessa, what she represented socially, how she reflected on me. When I saw how she referred to you in those messages," he shook his head, "it was like suddenly seeing a stranger." "Recognition is the first step toward better choices," I observed. "That's almost exactly what Dr. Callahan says," Michael noted with a small smile. "Sometimes I hear your voice, and Dad's in my therapy sessions, saying things you tried to teach me years ago." The mention of Charles created an opening I had been considering for weeks. "I've been meaning to give you something," I said, reaching for an envelope on the side table. "Your father maintained a separate file of letters for significant moments in your life. This one was marked, 'For Michael, when he begins to understand.'" Michael accepted the envelope with visible emotion, running his thumb over Charles's handwriting on the front. "I've read and reread the letter you gave me that night," he admitted. "It was like having a conversation with Dad across time." "Charles was insightful about both of us," I acknowledged. "He recognized my blindness where you were concerned long before I did." "Will you tell me something honestly?" Michael asked suddenly. "Do you think we can ever get back to, not what we were before, but something authentic? Something better?" The question hung between us, weighted with months of structured interactions, formal restitution, and carefully maintained boundaries. I considered my response carefully, as I would any consequential decision. "I believe we're already building that new relationship," I told him. "Not through declarations or performance, but through sustained action. Each meeting where you arrive prepared, each payment made on schedule, each therapy insight genuinely applied rather than merely reported." "Small, consistent choices," he murmured, echoing language from his financial counseling. "Exactly. Trust isn't rebuilt through grand gestures, but through reliable patterns that gradually replace broken ones." Michael nodded, absorbing this perspective. "I'd like to show you something," he said, reaching for his phone. After navigating to a specific screen, he passed it to me. "My new position. I start next month." I examined the employment offer displayed on his phone. The role was with a mid-sized biotech firm in Cambridge, a legitimate position with a reasonable salary, notably less prestigious than his previous inflated title. "Director of Compliance," I read aloud, noting the irony. It felt appropriate, he acknowledged with a self-aware smile. The CEO is a former Westlake executive who apparently remembered you favorably. When I explained my situation, fully disclosed my history and the restitution process, he said second chances matter, but only when paired with robust oversight. Victor Chen, I recalled. Principled but pragmatic. An excellent mentor if you're genuinely committed. I am, Michael assured me. The salary is modest by my previous standards, but it aligns with my new budget. The compliance focus means I'll be immersed in ethical decision-making daily. I returned his phone, genuinely impressed by this development. Unlike his previous career moves, which had prioritized title and status over substance, this position reflected thoughtful alignment with his recovery process. I'm proud of you, Michael, I said simply. Not because you've completed your journey, but because you've truly begun it. His eyes filled unexpectedly, Charles's mannerisms momentarily visible in the way he composed himself. Thank you, he replied. That means more than you know. As our meeting concluded, and Michael prepared to leave, he paused by Charles's peonies. I never properly appreciated Dad's garden, he observed. The planning it requires, the patience, the consistent care. Gardens and relationships have much in common, I agreed, standing beside him. Both require regular attention, honest assessment of what's thriving and what's struggling, and the wisdom to know when to intervene and when to allow natural processes to unfold. Michael carefully broke off one perfect peony bloom, offering it to me with a gesture that carried no calculation, only genuine respect. I'm learning, he said simply. After he departed, I returned to the garden bench, peony in hand, reflecting on the journey of these past months. The crisis that had begun with frozen documents had evolved into something neither of us could have anticipated, a painful but necessary recalibration of our relationship. The corporate executive in me recognized it as a successful restructuring, removing toxic elements, strengthening accountability measures, and establishing sustainable operations moving forward. But the mother in me saw something more profound, the emergence of the son I had always believed Michael could become, finally growing into his potential through adversity rather than entitlement. Charles's clock chimed from inside the house, marking the hour. I imagined him sitting beside me, nodding his approval at this hard-won equilibrium between accountability and compassion, between necessary consequences and potential redemption. We got there, Charles, I murmured to the empty space beside me. Not the way we planned, but perhaps the way it needed to happen. The garden offered no response beyond the steady rhythm of growth and renewal, peonies blooming, setting seed, and preparing for another cycle. Like the assets I had protected and the relationship now cautiously rebuilding, the garden represented the most valuable return on investment. Not just survival, but the possibility of flourishing in seasons to come. Thank you very much for listening. Please leave a comment with a rating from 0 to 10, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with a friend.